Welcome to a very special edition of Plank of the Week, because it's not Plank of the Week, it's actually Plank of the Year. You're going to be seeing all sorts of people joining in, and I'm delighted to say that kicking us off, Mr. Mark Dolan, Talk Radio's very own anti-masker, although of course he's not really an anti-masker, are you?
I'm delighted to debate all of the COVID measures.
Of course you are. And Emily Carver is also here, a woman who, if it wasn't for Dawn Neesom, would have appeared most on Plank of the Week for the whole year. We'll be seeing Dawn Neesom a little bit later on. And so what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the top 20, starting with number 20. And it is, of course, the Welsh First Minister, Mr. Mark Drakeford.
What has been inflicted upon the Welsh people in the name of a scientific punt, as in a national lockdown,
Scientific what?
Family show. And we know this is going out on Christmas Day.
It is, absolutely right.
Punt of the week. That
yes,
could be a format
that would
for
be
next
good.
Year.
Yes.
What's happened to the Welsh people, the good people of Wales, is cruel, actually. Don't forget that earlier in the year, this was a population that was subjected to the ruling in which certain non-essential items were banned from sale. So apparently an oven tray or a winter throw was the purchase of which was an arrestable offence.
Yes. Weren't books as well outlawed, Emily?
Books, any sort of entertainment, everything really. You had scenes of people trying to sort of rip down these stickers from the walls or barriers.
It was like a crime scene, wasn't it, in Tesco's? They taped everything
warning.
up. Unbelievable.
Yeah. So I think that's been awful, and I think that we've seen, certainly overreach and unilateral measures across the UK, but I think it's been at its worst in Wales. And I wonder whether it's the sort of left-leaning principles of Mr. Drakeford, whether you're seeing that sort of true socialism in action, a political ideology that loves to control people anyway, and the pandemic is the perfect opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, some people in Wales apparently think they're not going far enough, but I don't know what's wrong with them. Because Wales is such a weird country. They've got the whole M4 corridor, which is quite busy, quite populated. And then you've got Snowdonia in the middle and North Wales over the other end. They're all completely different, aren't they?
Well, I don't know how many Welsh watchers you have or listeners you have, but they're facing
Loads.
another massive lockdown on the 28th, I think, as well.
Yes, I think
They're
are.
going down to, Tier 4 restrictions. They're not going to have any pubs open, restaurants open, non-essential shops closed too. So it's going to be pretty bleak for the Welsh.
I don't think you can buy a drink in Wales anywhere now.
No, you can't buy a drink. You couldn't buy a drink past 6 p.m. Or there was all sorts of rules, and they change every day, the poor Welsh.
Absolutely right. Number 19, Emily, I'm going to hand over to you. Jeremy Corbyn, former leader of the Labour Party, now independent MP.
Well, I mean, he's had a pretty extraordinary year, hasn't he? Delivering the worst Labour loss for decades. So that was
30-odd years, since the 1930s, I think.
Since the 1930s, so that's the first reason why he's a plank. His most recent his revelation is that he's starting a new peace and, what is the word of it? What's it called?
Justice.
Peace and Justice Society or institution,
yes.
Which he decided to reveal on Twitter about an hour late from when he said he was going to keep the audience, waiting. So he's delivering this, and he said, we're going to bring people together. And
really?
I thought that was quite plankish.
Well, that makes a change, doesn't it? Because normally he likes to keep people apart, usually somewhere between the West Bank and Jerusalem.
I would say he's probably been the most divisive political figure in the last God knows how long.
Let's not forget, Mark, he was actually expelled from his own party for anti-Semitism.
Well, it's extraordinary. And I know this is a hard sell given present company, but the Labour Party is one of the great political outfits in the history of Western democracy, and a lot of good stuff has happened within Labour governments.
This is not a comedy show,
Right?
You have to try and be reasonably serious.
Can I just point out, it's Christmas, and I've been on the eggnog. So. But what our country has pretty much sort of alternated between Labour governments, Conservative governments. The Lib Dems haven't had much of a look in, and you generally have a sort of path through our recent history in which the two different parties have made their own contributions. What you've seen under Corbyn is almost the destruction of the Labour Party, and I think that would do our democracy a disservice. And luckily, I think that Keir Starmer has kind of stopped the rot a little bit.
You think?
But the scars remain. Labour is still a very divided party, and huge support has been lost across the north and, of course, the entirety of Scotland.
And don't forget, the reason for him to be in the Plank's top 20 is for several things that he did. You might remember fairly early on in the lockdown when Parliament was saying people should stay away because it's quite dangerous. We don't want to infect everybody. Because the one thing the politicians have managed to do is they've all managed to get coronavirus or know somebody who did, much more than anybody else. Even old Emmanuel Macron tried to make a last-ditch effort to get on the planks list by getting coronavirus and giving it to half of the European leaders that actually went to a meeting with him. But Corbyn was the first guy back into Parliament. 70-odd, he was told if you're over 70, you shouldn't really be going out. He gets straight in a cab, slams the door as hard as he possibly can to try and break the paparazzi's arms. He then had a meal. Do you remember the meal that he had?
Yes, of course.
And it was literally Dave Spart's dinner at home with 9 people, one of whom was like a Venezuelan filmmaker or something, right? Another guy was a sort of, an artist, street artist. His partner is a Venezuelan coffee maker. I mean, it really is just a joke, isn't it?
Well, indeed. And Jeremy Corbyn is famously a teetotal and vegetarian. So how he got an invitation to a North London dinner party, I don't know.
Well, he lives there. That's how he got an invitation.
Oh, it was round at his house?
Yeah, it was round. Wasn't it round at his house?
I see.
I thought it was.
I realised that.
Yeah.
Now he's back where he belongs, isn't he? As a sort of anti-establishment
Yeah, he's back on the back benches.
protester, which is where he belongs and where he should have been all along.
But he hates Keir Starmer so much that he actually voted against the Labour abstention, didn't he?
Yeah,
on the old,
that's right.
Should we shut down and go into further tiers? And I think that feud is going to keep us all going
And
for
also,
probably a couple of years.
Maybe like a lot of over 70-year-olds in this country, in relation to COVID, perhaps he wants to manage the risk on his own terms and make a decision about whether it's safe for him to go to work. So in that way, maybe he's a bit of a hero.
Well, I mean, it's not that safe for him to go to work because he doesn't take all the knives out of his back from the last time he went in. That's the trouble. Next up, we go to number 18, and this is quite a late entry, Kay Burley from Sky TV.
The issue you got with Kay Burley is that she and Sky News have been at the forefront of this pro-lockdown mania. And every press conference, the likes of Beth Rigby, who of course was implicated in this breaking
How
of
does she
the
only
COVID
get 3
rules.
months and Kay Burley gets 6? How does that work?
Well, I don't know. I think that her contravention of the rules wasn't as severe as those of Kay Burley, perhaps. But ultimately,
Or maybe people don't hate her as much.
the crime of Kay Burley and the like is hypocrisy. It's not so much what she did, which was obviously unideal, suboptimal. She didn't follow the rules carefully, but she wouldn't have gone to jail for it. She probably wouldn't have got a fine. But given where Sky News have stood, and particularly Kay Burley and Beth Rigby, the hypocrisy is too much to take.
I mean, what did you make of them going to the Century Club? What a terrible tactic place to end up.
I mean, for me, she was a plank. She could have been on this list even before this revelation, just for the way that she refused. Well, it just appears so partisan on Sky News the entirety of time. It's like she's a voice piece for New Labour. The way that she has a seething distaste for Boris Johnson and everything that he does.
Yeah, and she was
I just
pretty
think
hard
she's a
on
poor
any
journalist,
and she
to be
was very
honest.
hard on any cabinet minister that turned up, wasn't she?
Yeah, exactly. I just think that she's shown herself to be totally partisan, and this latest behaviour just calls her out for the hypocrite that she is.
But
So much of our media.
But the
pass
thing
on.
about how it all happened is fascinating, isn't it? The fact that she was apparently stitched up by her own colleagues at Sky TV because they don't like her very much, and I can see how that could happen.
Well, that's true. They clearly all wanted to stick the knife in.
The story goes that they actually hired the photographers.
Wow, that's
You know?
professional.
Did they actually?
Well, I don't know if it's true, but that was the allegation.
Quite often when a public figure is sort of basically kept in post sort of by the skin of their teeth, is because there's a well of goodwill within the organisation for that person. You've seen presenters and actors and others misspeak and keep their job because basically the team around them quite like them. That's clearly not the case for Kay Burley. The well of goodwill is dry and empty.
Well, hopefully it's good riddance to her now.
Well, I don't think she's coming back, to be honest. But one of them is already back today, funnily enough, as we're filming this. We're coming out on Christmas Day, but we're filming it a couple of days before. Sam Washington, Samantha Washington, who was one of the group, is already back on air. I'm not quite sure how they handle that kind of disciplinary scenario. Really.
What really bothers me is that news platforms like Sky News throughout the pandemic have been pro-lockdown. Every question at press conferences, especially from Beth Rigby, is why didn't you lock down sooner and why isn't the lockdown longer? And I don't think that any news platform should be pro or anti-lockdown. What you've just got to do is
how about just do the truth?
That's what they
inform
think is
people.
holding the government to account, but really holding the government to account would be to suggest that there might be another strategy available.
Well, that would be a good idea.
And that's not what they're there for.
What is
clearly.
so awful is that Kay Burley has been the champion of lockdown and pushing for it and then broken those rules herself, and that is just beyond the pale.
Yeah. Well, the next one you're going to love. Number 17, Neil Ferguson.
Oh dear.
Imperial College professor, who cared so much about his own rules that he broke them on the grounds that he thought it was okay because, one, he'd already had COVID, and two, he really wanted to see the woman that he fancied, who happened to be married to another bloke and who was German.
That's right. I mean, this guy's sort of history of getting his predictions about the spread of viruses wrong is epic now. He really is somebody that just must not be taken seriously. It shocks me that he still pops up on the Beeb and elsewhere as this great sage of
this
science.
is the thing. He was on BBC Newsnight, I think, just about a week or two ago.
They keep putting him on, don't
I think
they?
last time I was on Plank of the Week, actually, he was back on, and he wasn't just just talking about the virus or whatever. He was talking about how people had been so harsh to him and how he'd been used as a scapegoat and Webb tied me, how sad it is for me, and all this garbage. So he really is a plank.
He really is, absolutely right. And finally, number 16, the Metropolitan Police. There's so many reasons why, but you might not remember the situation with Cressida Dick when she broke her own rules, clapping for the NHS. Hanging about on Westminster Bridge, I think it was, very in the early days of the pandemic, standing too close to people, in addition to all of the not arresting of people who were involved in the Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter protests and all the I mean, you don't know where to begin, really.
I think it's the Extinction Rebellion, the antics on that bridge.
Yes.
When they were skateboarding around.
Skateboarding and dancing.
While people weren't able to get to the hospitals that they were trying to get to, or indeed to their work. So I think that was one of the biggest plankish moments from them.
Yes, I think perceived double standards where certain political causes are allowed to just have free rein at a protest, and others, such as, I don't know, an anti-lockdown march, are considered public enemy number one. And that's not a judgment that the Met Police should be making. No. I think, as a caveat, that they've had to execute and police some absurd rulings and mandates that come from the government. So it's really the government's fault.
No one told them to bend the knee, though.
Yeah, taking the knee, you have to say, was probably the most stupid thing you've ever seen the police do.
Well, I think ultimately they've had a bad...
bottles thrown at them.
The cops have had a bad pandemic. The rules don't help, but you've seen crazy overreach. We're seeing, for example, I think upwards of 12 police officers turning up to close a gym early in the second national lockdown in England. I mean, just think of all of the burglaries and muggings that are going on in that area whilst they're trying to close a gym.
And they were sat outside a hairdresser's, just monitoring this lady and her establishment.
That's the wrong colour. It's not the right colour. We're going to have you for that. Can you imagine? Well, listen, guys, thank you for kicking us off. We've done 20 to 15. Coming up, Emily Carver and Mark Dolan. Coming up, we're going to have two other panellists who are going to talk about the 15 down to 10 numbers on the top 20. This is Plank of the Year. Welcome back to Plank of the Year. Over to my left, you will see some people enjoying it very much. They're not just an audience, they are, of course, participants in Plank of the Year, and they will be here later on as well. Right now, though, we are back, and we're going to do numbers 15 down to 10 with Kevin O'Sullivan, Talk Radio's very own angry man, and Emma Webb, who's, of course, a political commentator. We've got to kick it off with number 15, one of our favourites, Kevin, this year, Dominic West.
Dominic West, who starred in that well-known TV series, The Affair, and then decided to put it into real life. Headed off to Rome to film for another drama with the actress Lily James. If you're married...
She's in everything now.
If you're a woman and you're married, keep Lily away from your husband. Anyway, Dominic West and Lily headed for the Eternal City, where they were caught on camera by photographers, hugging, kissing in a restaurant, lovingly hugging each other on a scooter.
On a scooter,
electric scooter.
I mean, talk me old-fashioned, but I mean, that romance is not dead, is it, when you can get some woman on a scooter? I mean,
exactly.
There's nothing more romantic than a Vespa.
The slight kind of drawback was that he's married and has been happily married with kids to his wife, Catherine, back here in Britain. We deduced, took a bit of a dim view of these antics in Rome. And indeed, when Dominic got back from Britain, having been splashed all over the papers, love rat of the year, what are you doing with Lily James? You're married to this lovely woman. He organised coming out of his house with his wife, as if he's some sort of politician, to say, nothing to see here, this marriage is strong, and actually put a sign up saying, our marriage is strong, strong, signed Dominic and Catherine. And we're all going, hey, you think your marriage is strong, Dominic? I'll tell you something, it's in deep trouble.
I know. And he also made his poor wife sort of stand next to him.
Was this very sort of like Meghan Markle-style gun against the back?
Yeah, it very much.
Yeah, and then couldn't stop himself.
It was very David
smirking.
Miller-esque. You know, the wife was standing there dutifully, and he made her sort of take part in a kiss, which was awful.
Yeah, and then the kiss, he had his arms around her and sort of like this.
She
and then he looked at the camera, and he looked like sort of he had this sort of smirk on like this. And it's like, yeah, I got away with it.
I got away with another one.
Silly woman. She's actually believed me. Anyway, we all said, you say your marriage is strong and is in no trouble. We've got news for you. And sure enough, about 2 days later, Catherine up stumps and went off to Ireland to stay with her mum.
Mother, yeah.
So I don't give that marriage much longer.
Wasn't he also particularly unkind about Donald Trump's moral qualities as well?
Yes, he was.
And he said he was jumping for joy when he found out
did.
that
He was
Donald
interviewed
Trump...
shortly before the story came out. He was interviewed, I think, on one of the morning programmes because he was promoting this show that he was doing. And he said something about jumping for joy because Donald Trump had got coronavirus. And it was just like, that's really not a very nice thing to say. Even if you don't like someone, you don't wish them dead.
It sounds like Catherine's made a very lucky escape.
Yeah, I think so. And the moral of this story is whether they're a prime minister or an actor, never trust an old Etonian.
Very much so. Number 14, one of your favourites ever, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland.
Oh dear. Well, there are so many reasons why she could possibly be on this list, isn't there?
There really are.
I think the latest thing that she's done that was particularly plankish was banning the royal family from spending Hogmanay at Balmoral and getting antsy about the fact that Will and Kate were doing this royal tour and they went to Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And I think that she said to Camilla and Charles that they weren't welcome to come up to Scotland for. So we were saying before we started filming that, you know, that would be the best Boxing Day news coverage ever would be to see Charles and Camilla being sort of wrestled to the ground at the border by the police.
Yeah, by the border police. But they have this kind of team of people, don't they, who keep calling for there to be police patrols on the border between England and Scotland, which nobody who actually lives in Scotland wants. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable what they're calling for.
She spends her entire time banning things. Scotland is the world capital of banning things. You know?
Well, it seems as if she's trying to make it so that the Scottish people can't leave Scotland. And we know that the reason for that probably isn't anything to do with coronavirus. The way that she, even with the tier system, we had 3 tiers, she had to have 5.
Yeah.
And she obviously wants to try and, in every single instance, whether it's to do with hate crime or their vision for this utopian Scotland, they want to differentiate themselves from England as much as possible. And it's just got this nasty anti-English streak.
Yeah.
And now this sort of disrespectful attitude to the monarchy. I'm not sure how well that goes down in Scotland.
I don't think it goes down very well at all because they forget that the royals actually own most of Scotland, so they should be quite careful. It might turn badly for them and they turn out the other way around.
William Wallace, blue-faced Mel Gibson in Braveheart. You'll never take our freedom, Nicola. Want to bet?
Yeah, exactly right. Well, this is the other thing she's done. She also suggested that Christmas should not be spent inside. It should be spent outside. You shouldn't have any Christmas dinner at all. You should just go for a walk.
Yeah. But by the way, she also had instructions on how to serve roast potatoes and how to go Christmas shopping.
Bring your own spoon.
It's not that she wants to meddle in anybody's life or anything.
Bring your own spoon. Yeah. Don't share any kind of spoon that might be doling out potatoes to people. You can't get a drink in Scotland, by the way, anywhere. No. Now, I mean, if you're trying to stop people drinking in Scotland, I mean, hello.
What's the point of Scotland if you can't drink?
Well, her and Hamza Yusuf together have become this sort of Bob Marley and Scrooge.
Hamza Yusuf actually didn't quite make the top 20, but he was just about on the cusp of it for his hate crime bill, because this is the guy, with her acknowledgement and with her permission, wants to ban people from saying anything at all inside their own houses.
Inside their own homes,
right, that might upset somebody who's not even listening.
And by the way, talking about inside their own homes, among the millions of people who can't stand Nicola Sturgeon, it turns out her husband is one of them, because he sold her down the river, because she had this kind of dodgy meeting with Alex Salmond. Where she said
she forgot.
Yeah, which she said I forgot, and it certainly wasn't business. And then her husband cropped up in the inquiry and said it was business, and you did have that meeting. I bet you the situation behind closed doors at the Sturgeon household is not very content.
If she's that despotic in public, can you imagine what she's like in her private life?
This week, the most ridiculous story of all, she represents Govan Hill, which is a particularly run-down, poor part of Glasgow, which you won't be surprised to know has not been helped particularly by Nicola Sturgeon being the MSP for it. But they've also now managed to rack up the largest number of drug deaths in Europe. in Scotland.
Yeah.
You'd think she might be paying a bit more attention to that.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, though, that we've all had, millions of people in this country have had a terrible, terrible year, obviously. But at least we're not married to Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, you can say that.
Maybe
Now,
she should
number
marry
13.
Dominic West.
Number 13, the man who I know as Dr. Strangelove, Chris Whitty. You know, this is the bloke who's leading everybody down the garden path. He looks as if he's never had a day of any joy of any kind in his entire life. I don't think he's married. I don't think he has any kids. I don't think he does anything other than just stare at slides all day. Next slide, please. And it's like, oh, look, here's one of you and your career going down the gurgler. I mean, this bloke is unbelievable, isn't
I
he?
just always want to say, Chris, you know, just get some...
Lighten up, man.
No, I just want to say, just get some clothes that fit. I mean, that would help your image. I mean, he's got a huge neck and tie down here and his scrawny neck and his poached egg eyes. I mean, he looks like a space alien.
He does.
And
It's like the Mekong is now running government policy.
But he likes to sort of project this sort of solemn image of a decent scientist, an honest broker, just trying to tell us how it is. But he's an absolute shyster.
Yeah.
He's a shyster, along with his mate Valance. I mean, they've just been basically telling us lies all year. I mean, this sort of stuff about, 50,000 people a day will get it within 1 month unless we lock down. There'll be 50,000 deaths in a month unless we lock down. Oh, this isn't a projection. This is a scenario.
Yes.
Well, what does that mean? You might as well say, unless we lock down, there'll be 20 million people dead.
Yeah.
Because you're just plucking figures out of the
There'll be a
air
plague of
to
locusts.
scare people. It is blatant, thuggish, unsophisticated scaremongering, and both Valance and Whitty can do one, but particularly Whitty.
Thank you very much
It
indeed.
seems like the whole story of Chris Whitty, because there's not very much you can say about him, really, is there, other than
go away.
Yeah,
And I use the term
lost.
loosely. Yeah.
But the whole story of Chris Whitty throughout the course of this year is sort of the classic myth of the person who sort of gets drunk, falls asleep, and when he wakes up, everyone's pretending that he's king, and he just sort of goes along with it and doesn't really know what he's doing. And he's like, yeah, just, you know, shut the whole place down, harder, longer,
Yes.
you know,
He
keep
does have
them
that
all
look
in
about him as
jail.
if somebody shaved his eyebrows. I don't know if he actually has eyebrows, but that's another story. Now, we're going to move swiftly on to a woman who dominated the news for a while this year, Dawn Butler, the Labour MP, you might remember, who was tweeting out furiously that
Video
she'd been
fan.
pulled over by the police while driving through Hackney. It turned out that one, she wasn't driving, and two, they'd stopped the car because they thought that it might have been stolen. She then promised to put out all sorts of video evidence of how she'd been victimised because she was black, and it turned out not to really be anything like that.
And actually, in the video that she filmed herself, the police came off looking really very polite.
They did.
And all they'd done was make a simple mistake when checking the registration of the car, and she was the one who came off looking terrible. She was horribly rude to them, and then she basically manufactured this whole grievance mongering narrative off the back of the Black Lives Matter uproar, and then she made it into this whole thing about systemic racism when it was obviously a fabricated outrage.
But the relish she took in that situation, she was like all her ships came home at once. Oh, they've pulled me
Finally.
up. It's a stop and search. Oh, look at me, look, I've been stopped and searched.
And she was tweeting about it.
Racist.
She was
And
tweeting
came
about it
out-
so excitedly.
Yeah, exactly. She was so thrilled by it, and she came out of it looking like an absolute idiot.
Yeah.
Completely hoisted by her own petard. As you say, the cops behaved particularly politely. It turned out that they couldn't see in the car because it had darkened windows, so they didn't even know who was in it. It was an absolute pile of nonsense, and I don't think she did her career any good at all.
No, I don't think she did. Now, I'm not sure we've got enough time to do this justice, but number 11 on the planks list before we enter the top 10 is Mr. Matt Hancock, Secretary of State for Health, chief banner of all things that are any fun.
Loser, useless, wish he'd never been born. Next.
That's probably slightly harsh. I mean, I wish you'd just say what you think. You know, Emma, give us a
And
kinder, gentler
where
version
do
of
you
that.
begin with Matt Hancock? I mean, there was the interview that he did the other day where they were asking him about the MPs having their salaries raised, and he was sort of antsy, shifting in his seat, didn't want to say that he really does actually want the pay rise.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what's happening in the rest of the country. But it's just his interviews are so bad. And there was the one where he was, crying because he was so emotional
Yeah,
about the
weeping
first vaccine,
thing.
that William
What was that all
Shakespeare
about?
had the first vaccination. But he always looks like he's laughing, like he's sort of enjoying it. And
He looks quite smug, doesn't he?
His whole interview manner is so abhorrent. It's just impossible to like the man.
He's also the same guy that came out in the House of Commons, I think, saying that you don't want to be killing your granny.
Yeah.
I don't think I know anyone who wants to kill their granny.
It's exactly right about Matt Hancock. He is the high priest of what's so infuriating about this government. He is the high priest of only one side of the argument. You know, this completely blocking out of the Great Barrington Declaration, 40,000 scientists, epidemiologists, virologists and doctors all saying you don't need lockdowns, they do more harm than good. The fact that there's a very strong medical argument that the coronavirus really isn't that virulent. It's not virulent enough to warrant what they're doing to this country. He, like the rest of them, but he is the main one who just completely closes his ears to that side of the argument. Oh, no, we're doing the right thing.
He comes across like a
going,
defensive
no, you're not.
child, like a defensive child who's been caught red-handed and just is going to deny everything.
Because he has to close his ears to that side of the argument, because we all say there's a lot of credence to that other side of the argument, and if there is, Matt Hancock, Boris Johnson, the whole lot of them are sunk. Absolutely sunk.
And of course, there was also the interview to cross over planks that he did with Kay Burley,
yes,
where she was it looked like her sort of hardwiring had gone, and she kept saying misogynist, homophobe in relation to Tony Abbott.
That's right, the Australian guy.
And he didn't know how to handle it, and she was obviously being completely absurd. She actually looked like she was having some kind of,
episode.
Yeah, and he didn't know what to do. All he did was this smug smile again.
By the way, he's a very ambitious young man. I've got bad news for him. His political career is over.
And he doesn't seem to know it.
He is the first for the high jump
No
as soon as they
self-awareness.
can. He doesn't realise that.
Guys,
He's
thank
doing
you
a
very
great
much.
job.
Indeed, that's the first top 10 of the top 20 taken care of. Coming up, we'll go back into the next 5, which will be numbers 10 down to 5. Emma Webb, thank you very much. Kevin, I think you're staying with us. Olivia Utley's going to join us from The Sun. Coming next on Plank of the Year. Welcome back to Plank of the Year. This is when it starts to get a bit exciting. We're going to find out who's in the top 10. We've got an audience watching us as well, hanging on our every word as we find out with Olivia Utley and, of course, Kevin O'Sullivan, who's still with us, exactly who is going to start kicking off the top 10. And I'm going to come to you first, Olivia. Top 10, number 10, The Guardian.
Yeah. What exactly? What were the things that The Guardian have?
Well, The Guardian has had what can only be described as a pretty terrible year, right?
Yeah.
Because, of course, Suzanne Moore came out and described The Guardian as possibly the most poisonous, ghastly, hideous place that she has ever worked. Even though she's worked there for 25 years, they forced her out because apparently she's the wrong kind of feminist.
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry, just inadvertently
I mean, it's so easy to forget these things, right? I mean, apart from the fact that it's the
exactly.
most useless paper in Christendom.
Don't forget also, Olivia, that it publishes Carol Cadwallader's Lies.
Oh,
yes, there is
yeah.
that. Carol Cadwallader, funnily enough, has not so far made the list. I wonder why that is.
The Suzanne Moore debacle was absolutely ridiculous. The entire point of columnists is that they write their own opinion.
Yeah.
The editorial board of the paper doesn't need to agree with every single opinion that their columnist writes. Otherwise, it's just the same old rubbish from the same old people. And Suzanne Moore just couldn't bear to work there anymore, so she's out. There's definitely rumblings that other people aren't liking it there either. And just all over Twitter, you've got sort of civil war breaking out, and they've got an audience of sort of, 100, 115?
Well, ever dwindling. No, I think the daily
better.
actual print sales, Kevin, of The Guardian are now down somewhere around 60,000. And of course, they then say, oh yeah, but we've got this great online business, except it doesn't make any money.
Doesn't make any
and
money
it's also
because they
run by
employ
the Scott
thousands
Trust,
of
which doesn't
people.
pay any tax. Apart from that, they're a great bunch of
If the
leftists.
staff's mum don't buy the paper, they're finished. Now, the thing about the Suzanne Moore thing is, don't forget, what she actually said was that there is a difference between a naturally born woman and a trans woman, and
Shocking.
Let's dare to
Absolutely
say
outrageous.
there is, and this is the important thing. More than 300 of the staff of that free-thinking newspaper, that champion of free speech, signed a petition demanding that they got rid of her for stating such a heinous thing.
And of course, she said it in a totally acceptable, polite, but it's transphobic to have the debate at all.
But also,
so
as you said,
allowed.
Olivia, you know, surely the point of a newspaper columnist is to have an opinion, and the point of having other columnists in the same newspaper is that you can
write
disagree.
a snide letter having a little bitch about
but this is the new thing, isn't it?
columnist.
All these people who work in news organisations. I think there was there not one at Penguin Books?
Yeah, the same
recently,
deal. Yeah.
When they decided to have a petition to get rid of some author. Or other.
Hachette Books have just cancelled
Judy
Birchall's book about
Jordan
cancel
Peterson's
culture.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson's new book, which is going to make the publishing company an absolute fortune. And they were like, we don't feel like you should be publishing it. It's like, well, you work here. You know, you're welcome to make a complaint if you wish, but you can't just say, we now have to bankrupt the business and fire all the people that make all the money.
I seem to remember that was some really junior person
Yeah.
as well who was complaining.
The one who complained said that, I was in tears when I found out that you were publishing this book. It's like, really? You need to get out more.
But to go back to The Guardian, it is a window into the twisted psyche, collective psyche of that newspaper, that more than 300 of its journalists signed a petition to call for the sacking of a columnist who said what she thinks. I mean, what on earth are they doing in journalism?
It's so embarrassing sort of watching this whole civil war breaking out. I mean, you just don't do that to your colleagues all publicly and no one's reading it anyway. And I look on Twitter and, you know, I'm quite involved in this sort of world and I still don't have a clue what's going on. I follow 10 threads back and I think, and it's just totally nonsensical to the average person reading the paper.
I know.
There's always
also they also employ Owen Jones, so that's another reason.
Constant run on toilet paper at the moment. So when you run out, you know which newspaper to use.
Absolutely right.
Nice
now,
recipes,
moving on to number 9, one of our favourites, Julian Moore. The fox killer from last year. He didn't quite make the list last year because he waited until Boxing Day, disgracefully, when Plank of the Year had already gone out. We didn't actually make the list for killing a fox while dressed in his wife's kimono.
That was the best
so
story ever.
even if that wasn't the greatest story of all time, which of course it is, I mean, he's had an entire year of nonsensical lawsuits, most of which seem to end up being filed against the government, most of which cost the taxpayer loads and loads of money. And he's got one currently against the NHS, which if he wins will mean the NHS money, rather than being spent on patients, will actually be going to the Good Law Project, as he calls it, because he is apparently, the keeper of all morals in the country. Not to forget the fact that he's got a dispute currently going with his builder, who the builder says owes him £2 million, and he's only given him £1 million. This is a bloke who pretends to be poor.
You see, the thing is, this guy, what he doesn't realise is last Christmas Day, or was it Boxing Day, when he beat a poor fox to death wearing his wife's kimono,
a baseball bat.
With a baseball bat. He does not realise that was as his projected image. He wanted to project an image of the good guy, the nice guy, Remainer, cares about people, want the brotherhood of man. When he did that to that fox, and then blindly thought it was a good thing to boast about on Twitter, that was the day he was finished. He has been finished ever since then. I'm a well-known animal lover. I can't forgive him for that. But even people who aren't that bothered about animals looked at that and thought, you cruel so-and-so. I would use another term, but we're on television. He is an awful person who thought nothing of beating an innocent creature to death with a baseball bat while it was trapped in a net because it was near their chickens or something. And ever since that, don't you try and tell us you're humanitarian. You're the exact opposite. He's absolutely finished. No one takes him seriously, but he's definitely a Plank of the Year contender.
He's also an absolutely terrible liar. And there have been so many instances of this, but the one I really remember was I was on some BBC radio programme, and it was Chris Mason hosting it, and he was talking to Julian Moore about this death threat that he'd apparently received, which, is absolutely awful if he'd received a death threat. Then he said, I've had to buy myself a bulletproof vest. And Chris Mason said, goodness, that's terrible. How would you even go about buying a bulletproof vest? Well, he just hadn't. He was like, where's this bulletproof vest from? And he went,
the bulletproof vest shop.
literally. And then eventually he said, I'm going to have to go now, and just hung up. And he just really had to force
And he's
himself
another one who did that
bulletproof
thing
vest.
where he appeared on some, again, Radio 4 show to be interviewed about how awful his life had become after beating the fox to death. You're quite right. If you think about what you would have to do, sort of reenactments, and you had to just do that with a baseball bat to a fox's head, it's disgusting.
It's just, I'm no fox
He's a
fan.
horrible,
That's vile.
just a horrible individual.
You can't do that. He's finished.
Right, number 8, though, if you think he's vile, what about Prince Andrew?
Yeah. Wouldn't have
Oh, you mean the liar?
Yeah, the liar, the man who will not help the police with their inquiries because it might incriminate him.
He's a liar and a moron. That's the problem. He came away from that now.
He has got some bad points as well.
Yeah. He came away from that. I mean, he's a well-known pompous fool.
Yes.
That's what he's renowned for at the palace. The courtiers have always despaired of him. He's really up himself.
Spoiled
He's
brat.
stupid enough to think I really am superior because I'm so high-born. But he came away from that now notorious interview with Emily Maitlis on Newsnight, which was now last November, so like 13 months ago, thinking he'd done a great job, cleared his name.
That was hilarious. How do you think that went? Yeah, really well.
Exactly. And now he won't sit down with the FBI. The FBI calling for him to be interviewed about his association with Jeffrey Epstein. What does he know? He's not actually being accused of any crime.
No.
Now, people say he's said he's offered a statement, but he won't sit down with them. People say, well, why won't he sit down with them? And you think, well, because he's a pompous fool. But I think it's the palace and the courtiers saying, we cannot let this moron loose again. If we sit him down with the FBI, God knows what he's going to say.
Right.
Yeah.
He'll end up under arrest. So he is a fool, a liar, and he's in such disgrace he will never be allowed into public life again. He wasn't even allowed to pose for photos at his daughter's wedding.
I know.
I mean, how much worse can it get?
And I don't understand how he's stupid enough to think that this whole thing is just going to sort of disappear if he ignores it for long enough. It's clearly not. The FBI are onto him and they're going to keep tapping away. And the American police are just getting more and more furious that he's not paying them any attention. And they're not going to let it drop. So how he's arrogant enough to think that they will. I mean, if I were him, I'd get it out of the way quickly while there are all these COVID restrictions in place.
Yeah,
At least he won't have to go into
And also,
courtroom.
think about his poor mother, the Queen. Who has to sit there every week. And I mean, it's been recently brought up again because the Mail have done a big investigation into what he's lied about in the past. And you just think, the poor woman, I mean, she's got enough to worry about. Why can't you just draw a line over it, call an end to it all and just do the right thing?
And of course, Harry and Meghan have given the royal family a real kind of public image problem, and but meanwhile there's this sort of gaping sore weeping on the side of their image, and it's Prince Andrew. He is much worse than Harry and Meghan, I think, in terms of what the damage he's done to the royal family. All they did was run away. He is a real clear and present massive problem for them. It's a problem that they have to sort out, but they daren't, because they daren't let Prince Andrew sit down with the FBI for fear of what he might say. I can't sweat, you see.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's right. Unbelievable. Well, we're getting down to the wire here, because at number 7, coming in very, very high up the list, Mr. Lewis Hamilton.
Oh, yes, who likes to say that he's had a terrible life awful life, because he's experienced so much racism. This sort of suddenly came to the fore when the Black Lives Matter thing started off. I'm not sure if that was a complete coincidence. Quite often saying how he doesn't have enough... not enough money, but that's the vibe. He's come from this very difficult upbringing. He's a multi-millionaire. He's never spoken out about any
also,
of this
he came
before.
from Stevenage, because last time I looked, wasn't really that terrible.
Wasn't exactly.
I mean, it's not a great
exactly.
place, but I mean, I don't think you can really liken it to growing up in sort of the favela of Rio de Janeiro.
Yeah.
Where shall I live?
Drinking water out of the gutter.
Where shall I live? Shall I stick with my hometown of Stevenage, or shall I move to Monte Carlo? I don't know. I don't know.
Also,
why does he get knighted when he's a tax dodger?
Well, I mean, I think the tax dodging thing is quite important, because he's never really paid his tax here. He works for a German company. I mean, he tries to be
well, of course he hasn't paid his taxes in Monte Carlo.
Yeah, but I mean, he tries to be all green as well while driving one of the most expensive.
Because I got rid of my private jet. What about your Formula One car?
Exactly.
And also, of course, famously, he now dresses like a complete, absolute and utter circus clown. I mean, he's entitled to dress how he likes, but, he doesn't really do himself any favours, does he?
Oh, and it's also his Instagram posts are hilarious. He literally does sort of live, laugh, love Instagram posts, and it's just so hilarious.
Being pictured on the back of his boat on his own. Sometimes it's great to get away on your own. Well, who's filming you then?
Exactly.
There's a whole sound crew and film crew.
They're in a boat just over there, and he's cradling his dog or something. I think he's just. I mean, you want to say that he's done some incredible things and he's achieved an awful lot as a motor racing driver, but he's just such a kind of idiot when it comes to his own personal kind of statement.
By the way, now he's going, Formula One is too white, there's a real race problem, we've got to sort this out, Black Lives Matter. Well, he didn't say a damn word until the George Floyd thing. Not a single word ever. Suddenly he's campaigner of the year.
I know, unbelievable. Now, we're getting down to the top 5 very shortly, but coming just outside of that, number 6, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. What could you say?
Please, can you stop being Prime Minister? How about that?
So sad. This time last year.
This time last year was King of the World.
So excited. Yeah. I thought he was going to do absolutely wonderful.
Well, he was about to inherit the one job that he always wanted, because he was asked, wasn't he, when he was young, what do you want to be? And he wanted to be, Emperor of the World or something like that. He's now Emperor of Downing Street, and I'm afraid he's making a bit of a hash of it.
Yeah, I think he's gone from being this massive strongman to being just... I think his main character flaw is that he just can't bear any form of confrontation, which just isn't really acceptable in a Prime Minister. I mean, this is how he's got into all this problem with Dominic Cummings. I mean, he probably should have just got rid of Dominic Cummings at the whole Barnard Castle thing, because it would have saved his administration. He didn't do that. He then had to get rid of him 6 months later because he couldn't face having a row with Carrie. He just avoids rows all the time.
Which is unusual for a man that's been married as many times as him, because he must have had quite a few rows.
Yeah, he must have just drifted away and not really told his wife that he's found a new wife, and just kept it away until he divorced him.
I kind of like him for being our first ever Prime Minister that we don't know how many kids he's got.
Yeah, I don't care about that.
But I like him for that. It's funny. It's funny.
But he used to be funny, though, didn't he? He used to be funny. I mean, he used to stand up. Right. And he had this rather unusual turn of phrase, slightly Victorian, slightly old-fashioned, but kind of cute. Whereas now when he says ridiculous things like, this is the season to be jolly careful, you just go, oh, shut up. Don't do it.
Yeah, have yourself a jolly little Christmas, but make sure it is a little Christmas.
Yeah.
Ooh, he's such a wizard
and also,
with the words, isn't he?
The 3 families for 5 days rule isn't really enough families for him. He'd have to have more than that, wouldn't he?
Yeah, exactly. He needs to sort of hire the O2 centre to get all of his kids and all his wives in.
My favourite thing is when he obviously doesn't want to marry Carrie, and he's trying to avoid, exactly.
Who would?
But I love the way all regulations get loosened apart from all the rules around weddings. So it's like, you can meet 40 people to do this, in the summer when it was all being properly relaxed.
Right. So
and then it got down to, you can do literally everything apart from no weddings. Absolutely no weddings. That's the one thing. Coronavirus hates weddings. Please, no weddings.
but the thing is that he's, as we were talking about Matt Hancock just now, he's another one of these, if you come up with the other side of the argument about the coronavirus crisis, he's la, 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 he doesn't want to hear it. We all know that one way forward would have been what the World Health Organization recommends, what the Great Barrington Declaration recommends. No need for lockdowns. Vulnerable look after themselves. The rest of us get back to making this economy work, but he's going further and further down this road, and I just think every day he gets up and he thinks, my God, what have I done?
I know.
He has wrecked this country. Worst Prime Minister.
And listen, we started off at the beginning of the year, obviously, looking forward to Brexit, also looking forward to his prime ministerial leadership, and you had to feel sorry for him when he got taken to hospital, and he was really, really ill. But, when you get a guy who's now telling us about how we're going to roll out the most sophisticated vaccine that anybody's ever seen, we've got the best test and trace. Game-changing app, except it doesn't test or track or trace or any of that. And then he tries to do a Zoom call because he's isolating because there's nothing wrong with him, and he's not one of the only 5 people in the world who get coronavirus twice. He can't even manage a Zoom call without losing the signal.
Yeah. And this guy said that he likes to let it be known that he models himself on Churchill. Little did we know he meant Churchill the nodding dog from the adverts.
I know, absolutely ridiculous. Guys, thank you very much indeed. Kevin O'Sullivan, Olivia Utley, Deputy Leader Writer at The Sun. The top 5 of Plank of the Year coming next. Welcome back to Plank of the Year. We are now getting to the most important part of the list. And of course, given that that is the most important part of the list, we have to have the Queen of Plank of the Week, and that is, of course, Dawn Neesom, who has presented this show almost as many times as I have. Dawn, welcome to Plank of the Year.
Thank you very much.
For finding the time to do it. I've got some tinsel and a bit of a bauble for you, which I'll maybe present to you a bit later on.
Baubles. Straight in on the baubles.
Just, because it is a festive time. Russell Quirk, of course, as well. I think the top rated man for Plank of the Week that we've had all throughout the year.
What an honour.
And, of course, you kicked us off, I think, with the first ever one, didn't you?
Absolutely.
So there's very good reasons for both of these very good people to be here. But also, the thing we are going to now do is do the top 5. And it has been an incredible list so far. All the people on it, you would say, deserve their place. And you can't think of anybody really more plankish than the people we've had so far. But we have got 5 more for you.
There should be a fanfare, shouldn't
Can
there?
I start with you,
Doing
Dawn? Because number 5, coming in at number 5, for all sorts of reasons, Gary the Saint Lineker.
Saint Lineker.
Yeah.
Where do you start?
Well.
Now, I have a very, very small issue with this one, in that I do occasionally, just occasionally, find Gary Lineker quite amusing
Yes.
on Twitter.
Yes?
He can be quite dry,
He can.
quite funny when he sticks to football. And this is the thing,
Yeah.
when he sticks to football. Unfortunately, Gary didn't get the memo about sticking to football.
No. Well, it doesn't apply to him, does it?
It's no. I mean, obviously, he works for the BBC, and you are not meant to have an opinion that is going to sort of like upset anybody. And Gary Lineker has given a new definition to hypocrisy, hasn't he, really?
He really has. And I think topped it all off this year with the house guest, as he became known.
Yes.
Whose name...
The house guest that was supposed to move in with him permanently and lasted for about 4
Well,
days.
yes. I mean,
Did it
because-
even happen? Did
Well,
anyone know?
I wonder whether it
Did-
even happened. I find it quite difficult to believe that he had a house guest who was in fact an asylum seeker and he didn't take a picture of him in his house.
Funny, well, obviously the asylum seeker wanted no publicity whatsoever, but this was
Obviously.
lecturing everybody else on how dare you, you're racist, these poor people travelling across the channel, and I'm welcoming them, he did say them, to my home. And
So
it's
what,
like...
and what I particularly object to with this guy is that the taxpayer, to us, are paying him, I think, about £1.5 million a year now. to
Did he
do
not?
his-
He did take a pay cut. I think he might
for
be
about
down to
400
$1 million.
grand.
I don't know how he
So,
copes.
so to do his match of the day thing, which is fine, but we're also technically paying for his notoriety
Yes.
that allows him to preach to us. Not only to preach to us, all of his wokeisms, his kind of left-leaning claptrap, but particularly if you remember a few months ago, he was evangelical about masks. Do you remember that he was saying, why on earth would you not wear a mask? I can't believe you wouldn't wear a mask. Of course you should wear a
Yes.
mask. It's the easiest thing in the world
How
to do.
selfish.
It's just a mask, just
And
put
then
it
was
on.
pictured in Marks and Spencer's about a week later without a mask.
Yeah.
And look, those Percy pigs are distracting. You have
And he
to
did
admit.
say, and I mean, a lot of people say this, I just forgot to put it on. Well, you don't really, do you? If
Well, you
you're
don't
going
when
into a
it's-
shop and you know you're supposed to wear a mask, unless you're somebody who really wants to make a point and you really want to show the people in the shop that you're a very independent individual.
But if you're walking
you
past
are wearing a mask because you're carrying it with you.
So you're walking past all and sundry with masks on,
Yeah.
and you've been preaching incessantly 17 times a day on Twitter about wearing a mask. You can't forget to wear a mask.
It's not unusual, is it, the preaching and then forgetting to follow the rules. I mean, it's quite common this year, really.
It really is. And also, he won't stop banging on about the European Union. And as much as he's quite an intelligent guy, and I think he's a very good presenter as well,
Yeah.
what he knows about politics, you could fit on the back of a postage stamp. I'm sorry.
But how does he get away with the BBC diktat that that BBC employees or people that work with the BBC, albeit as freelancers sometimes, that they should not show their opinion publicly. They should be unbiased. And he continues, presumably because he's their number one star and they
He
don't
is
want
the
to lose him, to
exception
be
to the
allowed
rule.
to do it.
He is the exception
Yes,
to the
it
rule.
really does seem remarkable.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, we can continue the theme as we move into number 4, Russell, because number 4 has
Seamlessly.
come in, and this is very scientific, as I said before. These are all the people who have been on Plank of the Week the most often.
You've done
and
the
it's
counting, haven't
the
you?
BBC. I've done proper counting and everything.
Yeah,
the
so
BBC.
For me,
oh,
I have to
Cole.
say, and I don't envy you putting the top or any of them together, but particularly the top 5 because they're all worthy winners. For me, the BBC would be the winner if it were up to me
Yes.
who the winner should be.
Overall.
For a whole bunch of reasons. The fact that they're unaccountable, the fact that their output generally is dire,
Right.
and actually this Christmas, it's normally relatively okay. There are one or two things that you might actually look forward to watching, but not this Christmas. I mean, it's appalling. We've had the whole Vicar of Dibley debacle, where that's been politicised by Dawn French.
Why would you even do
whereby
that?
she's literally taking the knee and telling everybody else,
and
explaining
sermonising
the
about a
so on.
political organisation.
But this is
It
also
is about a vicar.
But this is also the
I mean,
organisation,
really,
of
and
course.
God and all that.
The organisation that takes £3 billion from us as tax in order to watch the telly, but then banned Rule Britannia earlier on this year.
Right. And also keeps continually wanting to charge people over the certain age.
They are
of
criminalising
75,
my
that they-
mum.
Yeah, that they want to make them criminals.
My
and
mum
send
is
them
going to
prison.
end up in Holloway
Yeah.
over the BBC. She's refusing to pay, and I don't blame her.
Yeah, absolutely right. And also, they've still got this ridiculous kind of woke culture where on Radio 4, somebody must come up with this stuff. They refer to the fishermen as fisher people. Because just in case some of them might be women. Now, they might be.
There is a woman.
If there was a fisher woman.
And she gave an interview saying, call me a fisherman, it's absolutely fine.
What's
I don't
wrong
have a
with being
problem.
called a fisherman?
And the fact there could be more people in prison for evading their licence fee than are in prison for shoplifting.
Yes,
probably.
It really is true. And despite all of that, they still continue to do things like Glastonbury. I mean, we've saved a few bob, I suppose.
They only send a few
this
people
year,
down there, though, I think.
where they send to the Olympics more people than Team GB to cover Team GB.
Yeah.
Same goes for the World
But
Cup.
they're very
and they're a ridiculously over-complicated organisation, aren't they?
But they're incredibly diverse. That's what I really like about the BBC.
They're all middle class.
There's lots of working class people working for them. No, they're all
middle
white,
class.
Oxbridge educated
But even if they're not
men.
white, right, they're not diverse because if they happen to be from a different ethnic background, they're still middle class.
But most of them are actually, I'm sorry, white, and they're lecturing everybody else on diversity when they are probably the least diverse organisation in the country.
They really are. And I mean, I'd like to be paid their taxi bill from Broadcasting House, apart from anything else, because I know for a fact that will be in the millions of pounds because everybody gets a taxi.
And the bill for this crackpot idea, which was to move most of the BBC to Manchester.
Oh, yeah.
And then apparently the bill to get presenters and guests up to Manchester and back runs into literally millions.
Oh, it will do.
Millions of pounds a year.
Why do they bother? As you said, have you seen what they're putting out over Christmas? I mean, seriously.
Right.
No,
and nobody
and I
who
won't
works
be.
there has ever seen a budget, by the way.
You know what I'm going to be
And I
watching
won't
on
be
Christmas
watching
Day?
it.
I'm
I
going to be
won't be
watching this on Christmas Day.
Plank of the year on Christmas Day is what you want to be watching. Now, coming up to number 3, again, very close here, Sir Keir Starmer. Guffaw. Leader of the opposition. Very forensic man.
So, Dawn, do you want to stick the boot in before I do?
Do we have an opposition?
Well, not really.
When you say opposition, what does he do? All Keir Starmer has done this year is turn the pandemic and people's livelihoods and lives into a political football. It's all about Keir Starmer, and it's very easy to criticise when you're supposedly the opposition, saying, well, what about this, what about that? I would have done this, I would have done that.
And I would have done it sooner.
And I would have done it sooner. But the reality is we know he wouldn't. He is not actually representing the people that, in theory, would want to vote for Labour. I mean, if there was an election tomorrow, who would you vote for?
I'd kind of like to work out if this whole approach by Keir Starmer this year is either some very clever strategic thing where he's kind of hiding, letting the government make mistakes, this whole thing that, if you don't come out and do much yourself, then, you let your opponents kind of stuff themselves, or whether he's just inept. I think it might be the latter.
He's a barrister, isn't he? He's a barrister.
He's a former human rights lawyer.
Exactly. So therefore he is forensic, which means it's just basically blooming dull.
And a huge Remainer, despite the fact that 60% of Labour constituencies voted to leave.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, also, let's not forget, it was his policy on Brexit that
lost
cost
them
the
the
Labour Party the biggest loss.
But it's really in touch with the working class North, and he's living in North London.
And in the last few weeks, as we sit here, he's just about abstained on everything. Around, and probably will do on future Brexit legislation too.
He's got more splinters in his bum.
Yeah,
he also
any of them.
hasn't got to grips yet. We talked about Jeremy Corbyn earlier being kicked out of the Parliamentary Labour Party, but he's still got momentum all over the place. He can't seem to shake them off. And so much so that when Jeremy Corbyn gets expelled from the party, he then gets back in.
The next day.
Yeah. Despite the fact that, and there was 19 days, I think, despite the fact that Sir Keir Starmer is the leader, he had no say.
He's not the leader, is he? He couldn't lead his way out of a paper bag.
He really couldn't, and he's awfully boring, as you say, and he just has no
personality.
personality.
That's forensic. That's lawyer speak for forensic.
Yeah, but you and I have both seen some great lawyers, some great barristers, some great
That's enough about that
public
particular
defenders.
court case.
But the point is that, they're characters. Really good barristers are characters. He is the very least characteristic person I think I
He's
know.
got no personality. He's just boring.
And does he have any other suits apart from the blue one, by the way?
And the red spotted.
That's all he ever wears, is a bloody blue suit.
So in his defence, he does look slightly smarter than Boris Johnson, but
that's
so does the average slug.
Yeah.
The other problem with the Labour Party, of course, is if it's not him, who is it? I mean, there's nobody else that
Well,
I can
this is
think
the
of.
thing,
honestly,
who is it?
That's in the background that you would say,
No.
I wish, if you were a Labour Party member, which I'm far from being, if you would be able to say that you wish that XYZ were leading.
Well,
instead.
coming up to number 2, there is a man whose name has been mentioned as a possible leader of the Labour Party. Before I say what it is, I should tell you that it was a very close-run thing between our number 2 and our number 1, because number 1 had 3 different entries. 1 as a couple, and
You're giving
2
away a bit,
as a
Mike.
single. Well, we're about to 2. We're down to the last 2, and once I tell you who number 2 is, you're going to guess who number 1 is. Number 2, Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, creator of chaos, absolute mayhem on the roads. Dawn's a cyclist, and even you would agree that some of the things that you're seeing being done right now in the name of cycling, absolutely
Yeah,
unbelievable.
true.
So Sadiq Khan is without doubt one of the most inept politicians that this country has ever
A
seen.
lot of competition.
And actually by his own measure, really. So, when he was elected back in 2016, bear in mind we've had nearly 5 years of him, not his usual 4 because of COVID, so
Yeah.
5 years.
Yeah.
Bonus.
There were a bunch of things that he said he'd do. So he said he'd reduce bus fares. He hasn't.
Nope.
He said he'd reduce crime.
Nope.
He hasn't.
No.
He's bankrupted TfL. He also said he'd build 65.
Twice.
Yeah.
Bankrupted
He said he'd
TfL.
build 65,000 homes a year. He's built barely 20,000 a year. Crime is through the roof. He also said that there would be no strikes under his tenure. Guess how many there have been? 22. So he is a muppet of the highest
He really
order.
is. And he answers to nobody apart from those he likes.
Yeah, and all he does is
we
to win.
continually ask him to come on Talk Radio. He's never done.
He doesn't-
He was even on CNN the other day, right? But he won't come down
No,
here,
he
which is
doesn't.
literally
And
5
the
minute
irony
walk.
of that, Mike, the irony of that is he spends £500,000 a year on PR firms. Yet he won't do any other outlet other than the ones that you want
And
to do.
how much of London's money, considering he's bankrupting the city, has he spent on investigating statues that may or may not be offensive and we should tear down our history?
Well, £250,000 apparently. So
And he also wants to change the names of half the London streets.
Every Londoner, you stop and ask anyone in this city, do you give a monkeys about any of the stuff he is so passionate about? Because he's woke virtue signalling. That's all he's doing. But the hypocrisy as well, especially with the shutdown and the tears and whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it. And you know,
Well, the
really-
flip-floppery as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like-
don't go out, go out.
Yeah.
Don't go to restaurants,
Yeah.
go to restaurants.
We have to shut London down because it's all getting
we don't
infected.
forget,
We've got-
famously, he's the man that back in March, April said, you can go on the tube, you cannot catch coronavirus
Yes.
on the tube.
Yeah.
That's an astonishingly ridiculous thing.
It
to
is.
say.
He's an astonishingly ridiculous man.
And now he says, now you shouldn't go on the tube. Don't use public transport, whatever you do.
But you know, the worst thing is we all know the hospitality industry is on its knees, low risk of infection in bars, restaurants, clubs, all this, but shut down. And he was literally begging them to shut down. And then literally the week after was going, I'm with you on this. I feel your pain.
Yeah, yeah.
The government needs to give us more money. And it's all about having a go at the government. He doesn't give a monkey's about
Well, he
the
did the same
poor-
thing yesterday in Parliament. He was, or via Twitter rather, where he was criticising Rishi Sunak for presiding over the biggest recession in history. Well, look, go figure. Of course he has, because
Yeah.
there's this pandemic thing, which probably isn't Rishi Sunak's
No
fault.
one mentioned it.
But Keir Starmer, of course, was the man that not 2 or 3 weeks ago was saying that we should lock down sooner, we should lock down
Yes,
harder.
yeah.
Well, locking down sooner and locking down harder, guess what that does to your economy? So under Keir Starmer, if he were to be leader and prime minister, we would be in far greater dire straits than we are right now under Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson.
Absolutely not. But at least our number 1 planks of the year
Oh.
are not running
Come on,
the
do we need a
country.
drum
You've been looking forward to this,
roll?
They're not running the country, but they are, of course, everybody's favourite couple. It's Harry and Meghan.
Da, 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 da.
Or Meghan and Harry. You know, those lovely
one saw that coming, did
California
they?
residents in Montecito with 16 bathrooms, 9 bedrooms.
This is the ex-drug dealer's
A
house.
5-car garage, the ex-drug dealer's house, yeah. Well, he may not have been a drug dealer, but he certainly was
was
a
a gangster.
nefarious character of some
Yes.
description.
Bless
They've
them.
now got a podcast that they're going to be doing, which I can't wait to hear, where it's all going to be about, being kind
Have
and
you heard
compassionate.
just a little bit of it? Oh, the little sort
Oh
of
my
like-
God.
Yeah, but this is Harry and Meghan. They actually believe that they are an alternative to the royal family, right? So they're wherever
We've
they
got
are-
some awards going on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, their own nominations.
Yeah,
and so on.
absolutely.
That's going to be hilarious. Yeah, and look, a number of people have said this, and I'm sure most would agree with me, that you've got to feel sorry for Harry. I know he's been a plank in his own right, But the way that he has been manipulated and kind of driven and humiliated by Meghan, probably, as I've said before, to be kind of tossed away and discarded in a few months' time when she's kind of finished with him,
yes,
it's really quite sad to see, I think.
It really is. I mean, and that is apparently her MO. You know, she came into this country. We've all talked about the two of them many times on Plank of the Week. You know, she came to this country as the kind of darling of the nation.
Desperate for a rich British husband.
Desperate for a rich British husband. There was a picture I saw just the other day with Lizzie Cundy when she was out in Annabelle's or something with Lizzie Cundy.
Yes, absolutely.
And she asked Lizzie Cundy to introduce her to some famous British men. She did the same with Piers Morgan. She finally gets to get her hooks into Prince Harry, who's obviously, let's face it, not blessed with a great deal of brain power.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, he's every girl's dream, I presume, isn't he?
He's actually up there on
got a load of
uncles.
money and not very many brains.
Exactly.
That's what he's told.
Yeah. Exactly, on his uncle's
Perfect.
hand. But so, I mean, it's like £75 million from Netflix,
Yeah.
the company that have actually spent this year actually destroying pretty much the modern day royal family.
But also
with that.
destroying his parents' reputation.
Exactly,
Now, you might say that
absolutely.
Diana and Charles's marriage is known for not being particularly great, but they don't really have to rub it in, do they?
They really destroyed them. I mean, I sort of was lucky enough to work with Diana, interview Diana several times, and they portrayed her as being this
Crazy.
idiot, crazy.
Yeah.
And Charles is completely weird. It's not true. I mean, obviously it's a drama, but how you can then take 75 million from the company that have done that to your own parents, I don't know. But obviously Harry doesn't have a problem with that.
And say nothing about it
And
as
say
well.
nothing about it. And then 18 million from Spotify. Where they're going to do these little woke broadcasts,
Podcasts, yeah.
and
Yeah.
she actually simpers. Oh, I love your accent.
Yeah, I know.
And it's like, oh, you do it so much better than
And
me.
he's
by
now
the way,
calling
but,
them the holidays, right? Let's do something about the holidays. Like, it's Christmas, mate. In Britain, we call it Christmas. It's not the holidays.
He has started talking fluent Meghan, though, hasn't he?
He has.
Utter bull.
No, I think
Absolute
it's
rubbish.
utterly cringeable how they're both trying to stay relevant, really, when they're not relevant.
The thing is, you can't have a go at them because that's racist. It's not. It's absolute. You're having a go because it's sheer hypocrisy.
It is. Absolutely
And that's why
right.
they are number one.
The planks of the year.
Planks of the year.
Worthy winners.
All I need is an award. And here it is. Thank you very much indeed. What can you say? This was sent in to us by a fan, somebody who's gone to all the trouble, Dawn and Russell,
It's
of actually
lovely,
making
isn't it? It's very-
a proper plank. Now, we might wrap it in tinsel. We may have to send it off to Montecito, to the mansion.
I'll take it out of the person.
Or you
I've
could possibly
not
go
got an
on a
issue
plane
with
with
that.
it. Harry and Meghan, you are, as a couple, the plank of the year.